Hey everyone, it's your old games pal Lawrence here, and I've been doing a lot of thinking about Xbox cutting two very darling studios, Arcane Austin and Tango Gameworks, who have produced some of the best games I've played. It stings, but I've also been thinking a lot about the business practicalities of it. How does it make sense, you know? All these seemingly directly contradictory statements from executives. I think it would be easy to just wave it off as execu speak, and in some cases I think that is what we're dealing with. But I do think that now Xbox is in a different mode of operating based on some recent events, some of which are obvious, and some a little less so. I also think I know where Xbox is headed based on some of these moves, and that's because I think I've been a part of it a couple of times. I've worked for two companies now that were acquired and then dissolved by Warner. I've observed at a corporate level a couple of times now what happens in this scenario where a larger company acquires a smaller one based off of an idea of presumed growth, and either that growth arrives or doesn't, or the company itself shifts what it's targeting as a business model, and I think both happened here. Unfortunately, I think this is probably a lot of bad news for other Xbox developers, depending based on what Xbox's strategy seems to be now. I arrived at these conclusions with a particular methodology, essentially combining information we know, information we can probably assume to be true, and this interesting concept, which is that when people say things out loud, they rarely lie. They may only tell part of the truth. Well, some cases they do just straight up lie, but usually what people say is at least somewhat true when they say it. So when I look for corporate strategy, I look for the version of events that's plausible and also explains some of these seemingly direct contradictions we've heard. All right, so where's Xbox at? What are they doing? Why did they just lay off these darling studios? And what are they going to do in the future? Let me take through a couple of foundational concepts about the Xbox business. The first of which is that Xbox is focused on being a service and it wants its revenue to come from subscriptions. Xbox Cloud, primarily Game Pass. Phil has been very direct about this, and I think other results in the game space prove that it's a valid strategy. PlayStation gets most of their revenue by operating the PlayStation Store and selling PlayStation Plus. It's low margin money, and as long as you provide the service, you get revenue every month, and it's fantastic. It's great for long-term health of a company, and it's way more predictable than launching a game of varying quality and getting a single spike of money every 5 years or so. All right, the second point, Game Pass is the tip of that service-based spear, and it is behind. It's way behind where Xbox thought and wanted it to be by now. We only know it's behind because of some information that came out due to the FTC's lawsuit to prevent Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard. There was a particular slide in there, and here's the thing, we don't know when this slide was made, so those predictions have probably adjusted quite a bit since then, but this slide shows that they predicted 45 million Game Pass subscribers for fiscal 2023. At that time, they had only hit 30, and that's a significant shortfall. That's 2/3 of where they want to be. That was also before Starfield launched, which I think they were propping up to be a banner exclusive for the Xbox ecosystem, and I'm going to guess downstream of that, Xbox forecasted a huge Game Pass subscriber growth off of it. But the most recent number we have, 34 million as of February 2024. So it seems like Starfield didn't make up the ground that they needed it to or hoped it would at some point in time. Third point here, Xbox is absolutely expected to produce higher profit margins eventually, but we have no idea what that timetable is. Kind of seems like it's now. This also came from the FTC lawsuit, and this is something I'm really fascinated about. Phil Spencer said that the Xbox business runs at a single-digit profit margin, whereas Microsoft, as a whole company, earns around, often over, a 30% profit margin. Now, it's tempting for you or I to sit here and say, well, it's profitable. Why can't it just sit there and earn money indefinitely? You're not thinking like a corpo. To a giant corporation, it's not enough to earn some money. You have to earn the maximum amount of money you can with the resources you're spending, and that includes payroll. So if you're paying people to work for you and they're generating a work product, and that work product only has a single-digit profit margin, you as a Solus Corpo are going to look at that paycheck and say, why am I not giving that to someone else who can generate a 30% profit margin? I'm not saying it's humane or even smart. In my perception, this is how decisions are made when it comes to large chunks of money. And we just saw a lot of forecasts running behind, and Spencer has spent, which leads me to the fourth point about Xbox's state of business. I think the two recent events I just brought up, Starfield and the acquisition, have completely shifted the goalposts for the Xbox business. Spencer just spent $70 billion, so he's way in the hole. So now it's time to chase margin. this has been, I really do think this is like a switch got flipped from investment phase to, okay, it's time to make money phase. So if you need to raise margin, what do? You increase your revenue, or you cut costs, or you do both. And they are doing both as fast as they can. They're launching games on other platforms to increase revenue and wholesale cutting studios to cut costs. So the $70 billion thing is pretty apparent, right? You're in the whole $70 billion, you got to make that money back. And I bring up Starfield because both of the studios that were cut off were at the Bethesda level. They were under the Bethesda business unit. I think once the acquisition and Starfield's launch happened, then Xbox's success metrics suddenly shifted. And studios and products that may have been considered successful before that suddenly are not going to cut it in this new era. So to roll it back a bit and link why I think Starfield's launch is actually pretty critical here, it's important to remember, reportedly, and this is just based on the information we have, real life is often very complicated, but reportedly, Xbox acquired Bethesda specifically to secure Starfield's exclusivity because they were reportedly in talks with Sony to make it a PlayStation exclusive or have an exclusive window. So that's a big deal. And it makes sense. I understand the strategy there, but to put it another way, they incidentally acquired Tango, Arcane, id Software, a bunch of other developers to lock down Starfield, which at the time probably seemed like it had the potential to be a massive worldwide exclusive. It's not bad thinking. Bethesda GameWorks have made system sellers. Skyrim has sold 62 million copies. Those are the exact kind of games that Microsoft wants, those long tail, slow burn games that just generate loads of revenue and then push services. Now, we don't have any direct data about Starfield's performance aside from player numbers, which was 12 million, I think, last they said anything, but Starfield didn't need to just get players, it needed to grow the Xbox business, and we have some direct evidence that it really didn't. The quarter that Starfield came out, Xbox did see a 13% lift in content and services revenue. That's nice for a quarter, but hardware revenue actually dropped that particular quarter. Starfield didn't sell any Xboxes as a console exclusive. So even if it got sales and playtime, it didn't result in an expansion of the Xbox hardware network, at least. In terms of Game Pass, we don't know what the Game Pass subscriber spike was. From the window before and after Starfield's launch, 4 million Game Pass signups sounds good, but given how far behind they were, they may have had some deeply unrealistic expectations about how many Game Pass subscriptions Starfield was meant to move. And weirdly, I think not selling Game Pass subscriptions could be worse financially than just not selling units. I have no idea if Xbox attributes revenue this way, but just for the sake of a thought experiment, let's say Starfield was forecasted to earn 3 million Game Pass subscribers and it only brought in 1 million. That's $240 million a year in revenue that theoretically could have been attributed to Bethesda that's not there anymore. That doesn't mean they ever had it, but it means that maybe they were hoping to get it, and they were hoping to get that money to continue operating the studios that they have. The reality is probably not nearly that clean. My point is that Xbox was clearly forecasting to receive way more subscription revenue than they're getting right now, so unless they see a spike in that, they've got to really change their trajectory. Now, the frustrating thing to ask is why not cut from Bethesda Game Studios if they're the ones that delivered a game that fell short of expectations? Unfortunately, that's not in line with Xbox's future strategy because the only thing that can possibly make that $70 billion back is another Fallout or Elder Scrolls that actually hits. Which brings me to kind of the last point, and I think this is the unfortunate reality of where we're at. Sales of $20 or $30 indie games, even if they hit, even if they blow up and get 2 million sales, it's never going to put a dent in the tax that Phil owes Microsoft now to get back to good profit margins. And this is where everything kind of converges. And thank you for following me this whole way, by the way. Phil needs to cut costs and increase revenue. Theoretically, we like to think that indie darlings like Hi-Fi Rush don't cost a lot and bring a lot in return. I mean, the truth is we really don't have any data about how many Game Pass subscribers games like Pentiment or Grounded bring in. Unfortunately, we can probably assume in reverse, since Microsoft killed those studios, that whatever return they get isn't worth keeping those studios employed. It may have been in the past, but it's clearly not anymore, at least not for Bethesda. What we do have some data on, some general sales data in the industry, is that there's simply no comparing an indie hit to the earning potential of a huge established brand. So in terms of straight revenue, let's say a $20 indie game sells 1 million on Steam, which is pretty good for an indie game, you know, new title, new concept, new IP. That's 20 million in revenue. 14 million after Steam takes their 30% cut. 14 million that's a lot of money, but it's just nowhere near what Spencer needs to earn back. So let's say that he has to pay back 70 billion to the bank. It would take 5,000 indie games that all pop off that well to make up that money. A studio can only release one indie game every 2 to 3 years, and that's if everything goes right. Even moderately scoped games. So you're just never going to move the volume. Meanwhile, here's Activision with a roster of service and mobile games that are already up and operating, bringing in $2 billion in a single quarter. Once you're managing $1 billion game, it doesn't make sense to split that time with $1 million game, especially when you have tens of billions to earn back. That's what I linked to some comments about them running out of management time at Bethesda and Xbox. I do think that they're spread pretty thin, and I think they're realizing that they can't spend their time on games that are quirky or interesting. They have to narrow their working middle management hours to the billion-dollar properties. But they still need them, right? You can't just have a subscription service and only have one Call of Duty a year on it. Maybe you could. I guess COD has their own subscription service. Jesus Christ. But regardless, if you combine it, you still need your indies, right? But you don't want to pay for them. It seems like the highest margin business model now, and the one that PlayStation is already kind of into and Microsoft is clawing their way towards, is that you've got to own the big brands, because that means you own those revenue streams, but then you license out all of the smaller games that give texture and vibrancy to your platform. Buying exclusivity from a AA tier game is probably orders of magnitude cheaper than employing the staff for the 4 years of development and then hoping it turns out good in the end. This way you just get to run down the buffet and make offers on everything, and then you end up with 10 indie games for maybe the same price or less that are still exclusive to your platform, so it's identical to the consumer. The idea of shifting goalposts is also what makes Aaron Greenberg's statements about Hi-Fi Rush make sense. Yeah, this was really frustrating, especially given the closures. Aaron Greenberg wrote in April 2023 that Hi-Fi Rush, at the time, was a breakout hit for us and our players in all key measurements and expectations. Their expectations may have been a lot lower back then, so I could see why that made sense then, but now they've cut a check and they're still behind where they want to be. And this is where it gets really scary. Looking into the future, it's hard for me to imagine any developer on the tier of Tango or Arcane surviving the next 10 years at Xbox, unless they somehow produce a Game Pass Golden Goose, something that drives 10 million signups. But who even knows what that game looks like? Because I don't think we've seen it yet. Who knows? Pal World was a hit, but did it move Game Pass? Who knows? Helldivers? I don't see a lot of that in Game Pass's future. Hellblade 2 is probably not going to be that game, which has me scared for Ninja Theory. Luckily, they're not categorized under Bethesda. Luckily, Ninja Theory just talks directly to Xbox, so maybe their accounting is a little more clean. Machine Games, however, is under Bethesda. Hopefully, the Indiana Jones brand is strong enough there to pull players and eyeballs to their project and bring in the kinds of revenue or Game Pass subscriptions Xbox is looking for now. Another Bethesda studio I'm suddenly worried about is id Software. I'm a huge id Software fan. There are rumors of another Doom game being announced, which is probably the only property they've got that could keep them in the game here. I saw this on a quick Google. Doom Eternal generated $450 million in its first 9 months, according to a LinkedIn post, but that was based on estimates from an analyst group. If it's accurate, that's probably pretty good and would probably be pretty satisfactory to Xbox in 2020. I don't know if Doom is even playing at the level that Xbox wants in 2024. On top of that, and this is kind of where the rubber meets the road for you and I'm a little scared to think about what a Doom game that delivers the sorts of metrics Xbox wants would look like. It probably wouldn't be a Doom game I'd be interested in playing. I want to be wrong about that, but either way, I'm kind of sad where this is going. But I'm going to hope for the best. Reminds me of Suicide Squad. What's the only kind of game that Rocksteady could make that would matter to Warner? And it's a live service game featuring DC characters. They shot their shot because it was the only one to shoot. Otherwise, Warner's not even going to pick up the phone. The good news is there are other ways to increase revenue and margin without laying people off. It seems in exchange for higher revenue expectation from Microsoft, a lot of their developers have negotiated the ability to launch on other platforms. So see if these launched on PS5. That's super cool. More people enjoying a game, more money flowing in. No one's harmed, right? And for all the other devs that are in the Xbox family, I really hope they have greenlit projects for the next couple of years, or some catalog products they can release on PlayStation or other platforms for a bonus surge of money. Hopefully they can hit whatever shifting metrics Xbox wants from them, or maybe ride out this period for a couple of years until Xbox's expectations change again. So yeah, I think that's where we're at. Xbox is going to own the biggest studios and the biggest brands, and then they're going to license out all of their darling games from AA publishers, maybe acquire one if it happens to pop off and bring it into the family, and then lay it off 10 years from now, because that's just how it goes. Provided all of this reasoning makes sense to you, it sounds awfully depressing, and it should be. As a consumer, there was a time when the games that had the most investment also tried to do interesting things, and that also resulted in more sales. Unfortunately, I think we're out of that window in terms of the industry. More investment, more features, more content in a game doesn't necessarily guarantee more sales anymore. So instead of investing more and more into games, now it's a total scramble to find the perfect intersection of how cheaply can we make a game to sell for the most. On a professional level, this stuff sucks a lot. I've been a part of multiple companies, like I said, that have been caught in the shuffle. All have eventually shuttered. One even completely closed this week. My former employer closed because they sold out to a company that sold out to a company that merged with a company that eventually had no interest in what they were doing at the scale they were doing it. But I think there's still hope. In the same way that I feel like Corpo Gaming has lost its soul in the past 2 to 3 years, there's a new soul growing, and it's beautiful. I feel attached to this too. So I left my previous company, started doing my own thing. I'm growing my own production company now. I'm hiring people. We're expanding our output. It's cool. There's more people getting into grassroots games making and games publishing and finding success. And I'm seeing growth at that tier, which, the $1 billion companies don't care about, but they make games I don't care about, so it evens out. And ideally, this is where it all shakes out, is that the corporations are going to get in slap fights, delivering crappier products that people keep buying just through brand affinity and nostalgia. But these mid-range publishers are where all the action is. Responsibly scoped games that launch on time, feature complete, and have unique concepts and unique art styles. Maybe a few of those games pop off and become the next Fallout, or what Microsoft hopes will be the next Fallout. Get licensed, acquired, whatever. Somebody walks home with a $20 million paycheck. Hundreds of people get laid off 6 years from now. The cycle starts all over again. But at least at least as consumers and enthusiasts in games, we've got this middle layer where all the vibrancy is happening. The catch is that it's largely on PC. That's where all the players are. That's where a lot of the sales are. And that's where people have to come. It is the agnostic middle ground, which is great because it also has the most competition and the lowest prices on games. So if you're bummed about where games are going, invest in a PC and start hunting around for some of the quirkier AA games. That's where all the heat is, and it couldn't be better. Whew. All right. Hopefully that made sense. Hopefully you feel a little more... if you work for Xbox, I'm sorry. It's just crushing. I couldn't feel for you more, especially since a lot of my favorite games and developers have been swept up into that. So that sucks. But at least for us, there's still a bright future for games, provided you know where to look for it. All right, thanks for helping me get that off my chest. Hopefully it made sense. And catch you next time on Inside Games.